All right. Welcome everybody to Sustainable in the City, Thinking Upstream. You are here. It is October. Very exciting. The weather is still hot. We are in the midst of fall, but guess what? We have our brand new host with us, Christina Langone from Urban Green Lab. I hope you're all excited because I'm super excited to have our new host join us today for a talk on Walk Bike Nashville. How are you doing, Christina? Are you excited to be here on Sustainable in the City?
Oh, I am so excited to be here, Jen. Thank you so much. And yes, it is a balmy fall day. I don't think I'm used to the humidity of Nashville's fall yet. But I'm so excited to be here. Just in case folks missed the last episode where we made this announcement, our dear friend Patrick King is not with Urban Green Lab anymore. He has gone on to a beautiful adventure of his own somewhere else. And we are so excited for him. But we are even more excited because that means that I get to be the wonderful co-host of this fantastic Sustainable in the City series. And I am so excited to learn more about Walk Bike Nashville today. So how are you doing, Jen?
You know what? I'm doing good. I have not been walking or biking, but I've been reteaching myself how to skateboard as a commuter option. So, but I am also a biker. I'm looking forward to the cooler weather to start getting out there biking more. When we were over at Public Works, I used to bike to work. It's now about an hour and 15-minute bike ride. So I haven't pulled that trigger yet. But I do hope to. I do plan to. Yeah. Other than that, I know, right? An hour and 15 minutes. You know, I used to live in Chicago and it was flat.
Yes.
Nashville is not flat.
No, it is not.
So there's an added challenge there. But I'm looking forward to, now that there's cooler weather, to breaking that seal, if you will, and finally biking myself to work one of these days.
Yes, definitely. And the hills, my goodness gracious.
I do need an e-bike. Yes, Lindsay, I do need an e-bike. I see people on them and I'm like, ooh, I need that. That's what I need.
Yeah.
All right. Well, where are we at? What time is it? We've got a few. All right, we're about 12:03. So folks, welcome. To those that are here today, we are going to go ahead and get ourselves started. So what that means first off is that, as always, we will have time for Q&A with our guest at the end of our presentation. So if you have any questions at any point during this presentation, open up that chat box and you're going to see in the to section, make sure you click on everyone. We like this to be an engaging opportunity for people to share their thoughts and ideas and your questions. So make sure you select everyone when you're chatting in the chat box, but share those questions, share your thoughts about the presentation as we go along, and we will be getting those questions that you have at the end of our presentation. And don't forget to follow our YouTube channel as well to catch any previous Sustainable in the City episode that you haven't seen. We have had 3 full quarters worth of Sustainable in the City episodes talking all about all things waste and sustainability here in Nashville. So we'll pop that link into the chat here in a few minutes so you can make sure that you are following that playlist and following Urban Green Lab, who has that playlist of all of our previous episodes. But for now, you are here to learn more about Walk Bike Nashville and what they do for Nashville sustainability. And so I'm going to turn it over to Christina and our very special guest today, Lindsey Ganson. She is the Advocacy and Communications Director with Walk Bike Nashville. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Christina.
Great. Thanks so much. So Lindsey Ganson here is from Walk Bike Nashville. Like Jen said, she is the Advocacy and Communications Director. So she is going to start pulling up her screen if she wants to do that, because she has a wonderful presentation for y'all. And so she is going to spend a little bit of time telling you some basics about her wonderful organization. And then we're going to dive into a little bit of a moderated question and answer period until about 1 p.m. And then about at 1, we'll start pulling those questions from the chat that you all are going to be sending into us. So please don't be shy. Send in any questions you have. And then Lindsey I just wanted to give her a little bit of background. She joined Walk Bike Nashville in April 2019. She was served on the board for 3 years. She's a Brooklyn native. I just actually came from New York City, so hello. She moved to Nashville in 2014 and has worked in lots of different places, strategic communications, transportation alternatives, New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and New York City and Company, New York City's Convention and Visitors Bureau. So we are super excited to learn more about Lindsey and Walk Bike. And whenever you're ready, Lindsey, you can get us started.
Awesome. You can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay, great. Well, there's a lot of different aspects that I could have talked about when it comes to sustainability and walking and biking and transportation. Transportation emissions are one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gases. So, every trip we convert from a car trip is a good thing. But I was initially asked to speak about pedestrian safety and the Vision Zero plan. So that's the focus of my presentation today, but I'm happy in the question and answer to talk about biking or other transportation questions as well. I threw in the chat there, I also love e-bikes. So I love talking about e-bikes if we want to talk about that too, for those maybe looking to try a bike commute or a longer commute. So just quick or something to help with those hills on a balmy fall day like today. So a little bit about Walk Bike Nashville. We're a nonprofit organization and we've actually been around since 1998. And we work to make the city more walkable, bikeable, and livable. So we really believe that all Nashvillians should have the ability to safely and comfortably navigate the city by foot or by bicycle, and that owning a car shouldn't be a requirement to live a full life here in Nashville. And you shouldn't have to own a car to be able to access opportunity within the city. So our work, we do that a couple of different ways. We focus on advocating for safer and better streets, for infrastructure. To achieve that, we work to build a community of walkers and bike riders to support infrastructure and policy change by hosting classes, by good old petitioning and grassroots advocacy. And then we also do education classes within MMPS, so work within the public schools to teach our youngest Nashvillians how to walk and bike safely within the city. So with that, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about pedestrian safety and just start by saying the United States is facing a pedestrian safety crisis. And most of the trends that are happening in mid-sized cities throughout the country, we are also seeing here in Nashville. So the United States is one of the most deadly nations for people walking among all the developed countries. And the problem is getting worse. And something that really confounded researchers initially was even during the pandemic, when vehicle miles traveled, or the amount of car trips being taken dropped dramatically during 2020, pedestrian deaths actually increased. So I'll talk about a bit more about that and why. But it's not just a factor of population growth or the number of vehicle miles traveled. There are things that are happening in our society and the way that we think about safety that it is making the problem of pedestrian safety worse in the United States, and that's true in Nashville. Another thing that's really important to note about pedestrian safety, both and the state of pedestrian safety, both nationally and here in Nashville, is that the burden is not shared equally, that people of color are much more likely to be involved in a crash as a pedestrian. And also people in lower income areas are more likely to be struck and killed, and they're struck and killed at much higher rates than people in wealthier neighborhoods. And I have a slide in a couple more slides that shows that holds true for Nashville. So that's true nationally, and it's true here in Nashville. So there's a couple reasons why that happens. Some is because there's less access to cars, so probably more higher rates of people walking. But it's also true that where there's more people walking in lower income areas, we have less pedestrian infrastructure. So fewer sidewalks, fewer crosswalks. Just an example I like to think about here in Nashville is like, think about Belmont Boulevard versus Dickerson Road, right? Those are two very different streets that feel very different and have very different levels of infrastructure for pedestrians. And they're two very, very important streets in Nashville. So here's a look at the numbers in Nashville. And unfortunately, we're on track again in 2021 to have another record year for pedestrian deaths. So in 2021, we've already had more people killed than this same time last year. So we can, if you know, the trends, and there is some seasonality to when people are killed while walking. More people are killed while walking in October, November, December, January, and that has to do with the time change and that there's less daylight, and that also there tends to be more people walking during those times. So those are typically the most dangerous months. So we haven't even gotten to those months yet, and we've already on track, on pace to have another record-setting year for pedestrian deaths in Nashville. And that's not, again, just to look at it's not just a factor of population increase, because the percentage of total traffic deaths that are people walking is also on the rise. So about a third of all people killed in traffic crashes is someone that was walking. So given that the vast majority of trips in Nashville are made in cars and vehicles, it means a very small percentage, of a very small part of our city of people that are taking trips and moving around on our streets are really overrepresented in the number of people getting killed while using and accessing the street. So here's the slide I mentioned earlier that shows where people have been killed in Nashville, and then also this map overlays census data about income with fatal pedestrian crashes. And you can see just by looking at it that there's pretty strong correlation in where people are being killed. Like the Green Hills, West Nashville area, the whitest and wealthiest part of the city, see far fewer serious pedestrian crashes, while parts of our city like Dickerson Road and South Nashville and North Nashville see many more. So a bit more about why this is happening. I wanted to touch on a story of one person that was killed. And this is about Kenny Urbach. So Kenny Urbach was a father of 3 who lived in the Inglewood area. He rode the bus every day because he was not able to drive due to living with a disability. On January 3rd, 2020, at 8:30, he was headed home from a doctor's appointment. It was dark. He was getting off the number 53 bus at a stop near his house on Ardee Avenue and Gallatin Pike, right there at the Sip Cafe, if folks are familiar. And after exiting the bus, he tried to cross Gallatin to get home. He waited for the traffic light to change and began to cross the street, the crosswalk, which, again, if you're familiar, it's about a 70-foot wide street. It's one of our wider streets. But it only gave him the signal there only gives you about 6 seconds to cross the street before changing. Kenny has sciatica and he couldn't make it in time. So he was hit and killed by a driver going 67 miles an hour, and the driver never stopped and took off. Another thing just to note about Nashville is about a third of all of our pedestrian deaths are hit and runs, and they often never find the driver. So we're also always not sure of all of the details of exactly what happened because we have so many hit and runs here in Nashville. So this crash is very typical of most of the deadly crashes involving pedestrians in Nashville. On the one hand, it's really easy to say, oh, the driver was going 67 miles an hour. It's this outlier. He was speeding down. But yes, you should not drive 67 miles an hour down Gallatin Avenue. And the fact that the driver didn't see Kenny was 6'3", that they didn't see a 6'3" man standing in the middle of the street. The driver is definitely at fault here. But when you just look at one person's behavior or one person's mistake or bad decision in this case, we miss a larger and even stronger trends that led to this crash, because this kind of street, and you see a picture of it here, this intersection, allows this kind of driver behavior to happen. And if we build our streets to allow people to be able to drive at 67 miles an hour, crashes like this are inevitable, because we drive based on the cues the street gives us. And a street like this tells us we can drive 60 miles an hour, that we should not expect pedestrians here. There's no space for pedestrians, so we shouldn't expect them. And we can just, it's a straight drive, and let's just go the fastest we possibly can between each traffic light. So this is where streets like our main pikes and roads are where people are being killed in Nashville. In fact, 7 streets account for over half of all pedestrian deaths. So where people, we know exactly where people are being killed, and it's on our pikes, it's on streets with 4 or more lanes, it's on our busiest transit routes, it's near Walmart and Kroger, it's near our transit stops, and it's where we have not enough pedestrian infrastructure to keep, and that's everything from crosswalks, but also sidewalks, also pedestrian signals. There's just not the infrastructure to keep pedestrians and drivers safe. And I mean, another thing that we also really need to look at in the longer term in Nashville is the speed limit on these major pikes. So in this stretch, it's 40 miles an hour, which is not a safe speed for where people are going to be walking. And we historically in Nashville have prioritized along these pikes the movement of cars over the safety of people. And so in the long term, it's really a decision that Nashville and that all the various agencies involved in moving traffic and all of our elected officials really need to look at, do we want to reduce traffic deaths, and do we want to potentially get to a vision zero, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, but that's setting a goal of 0 deaths. If we're serious about reducing traffic deaths and preventing pedestrians from being killed, we cannot have traffic moving at 40 miles an hour. We can't set the speed limit of as 40 miles an hour or more on our major pikes, and we really have to build our streets to support pedestrians and change the speed limit and change driver expectations. So this is just a chart showing what I just mentioned. It kind of names each of them of those seven streets that are responsible for half of all deaths. And so this is looking from 2016 to 2020, but this does not change. These are the same streets year after year after year. You know, one year Dickerson might have more than Nolensville, but it's the same streets, and it's been the same. And this is where the majority of deadly crashes have happened over the past 10 years. So all of these streets have 5 or more lanes. They have significant transit use, and they have high speeds. So again, this is just looking at the same data, the speed limit, the number of lanes, and also, I haven't spoken, the story of Kenny is also emblematic of crashes that kill pedestrians here in Nashville, because it did also happen at night and in dark. So we do see most pedestrians are being killed at night, and there are many things that you can do to add lighting, what we call pedestrian scale lighting, that would, light up crosswalks, light up where pedestrians are, that could make a big difference in nighttime safety, and have other benefits too, not just traffic safety, but also, safety overall. So just a bit about why is a speed limit, and why is speed so deadly? Well, it seems obvious, but it's really a little known fact that when you have somebody walking, the difference between 20 miles an hour and 40 miles an hour is literally life or death. It means the difference of surviving the crash, being likely to survive the crash. If you're hit by a car traveling 20 miles an hour while you're walking, then there's a 90% chance you're going to survive. If you're hit by a car going 40 miles an hour, which, remember, that's the speed limit on most of our streets where people are walking and accessing transit. If a driver makes one poor decision, or a pedestrian makes one poor decision, and the driver's traveling 40 miles an hour or more, there's an 80% chance somebody will be killed, that the person walking will be killed. So the speed limit really makes a huge difference. And this is just a note about our pikes, right? Our pikes were built initially to connect the center of Nashville and the surrounding areas to other nearby towns. Like Murfreesboro Pike is a great example of this, right? And this animation, sorry, isn't working, but it kind of shows the difference of how it's evolved. But we all know Murfreesboro Pike is no longer a rural highway, right? And so should we be treating Murfreesboro Pike like a highway that's going to connect to two different places? Or are we going to treat it like what it is and what it continues to become, which is a street along which there are many different neighborhoods, where many people live, where there's many schools, where there's many people walking, many people taking transit. And so our street design needs to change with the way the development of our city has changed. And we all know, along Gallatin Pike, along Murfreesboro Pike, coming up along Dickerson Pike, these pikes the land use around the pikes has changed dramatically and continues to change. And will continue to change, but the street itself has not changed at all. So this is just a little bit more about why speed is so important. And we can make changes to the speed limit, we can lower the speed limit, but people are going to drive the way the street tells them. People are going to drive the maximum speed, the fastest they possibly can, based on what the street allows. Really, like, let's be honest, the only thing that gets people to slow down is when they think they might wreck their car, right? So we need to design streets so that we have narrower lanes, right? That people are being signaled that they're in a place where they might wreck their car if they don't slow down, where there might be people, and really that slowing down gives people time to what we call expect the unexpected, right? That it gives you more time to think. So it's not only just the impact that the crash will have on a pedestrian in the case of a crash. It actually gives you more time to think, makes the stopping distance shorter, and makes it more likely that you will be able to brake before hitting a pedestrian if you're going a slower speed. So just another example of the kind of streets where people are walking in Nashville all the time, where cars are speeding by at 40 miles an hour or more. There's not enough crosswalks. There's not crosswalks. There's long distance between the crosswalks. And then here's, an example of the same kind of arterial street in Stockholm, Sweden, which maybe Murfreesboro Road will never look like this. Like, you gotta be realistic here too, but just like understanding the difference between the two, that we in Nashville are really on the extreme of poorly designed streets that don't allow any space for people. And so there's certainly somewhere between what we have on most of our pikes and what they have in Stockholm that could really save lives every year and just make the city more livable and comfortable for everyone. So just another thing, along with building more crosswalks and sidewalks and more spaces for pedestrians, we could also just add more lights, and that would make a huge difference. All right, so really quickly, I just wanted to talk about Vision Zero and what it means a little bit more. I was talking about it really throughout all the previous slides, but I really want to explain it here. So Nashville does have a Vision Zero goal, a goal of 0 traffic deaths, and they're currently undertaking a study to come up with an action plan that should be released by the end of the year about how Nashville is going to get to 0 traffic deaths. So Vision Zero is more than just setting the goal of 0 traffic deaths, though. It's really changing the whole orientation of how you approach traffic safety. So even the fact that we call it an accident is something that changes under a Vision Zero approach. If you haven't noticed up until now, I haven't said accident once. I've said crash, collision, because accident implies that it's inevitable, that people are going to die in traffic, right? But in the Vision Zero approach, we say traffic deaths are preventable and crashes are preventable. So we're not going to tolerate we're not going to tolerate people being killed in traffic. So what can we do to retrofit our roads to build a safe system so that we're preventing traffic deaths? And many other countries around the world have figured this out and made dramatic improvements in the number of people being killed and injured. And I should say not only countries around the world, but also other cities in the United States, that even nationally, we're seeing the trend going up. There are cities that have seen declines because they've been very aggressive in their approach to Vision Zero and to traffic safety. And they've retrofitted some of those pipes and streets and arterial streets in their city to add more pedestrian infrastructure, and they've prevented the traffic deaths that are so common here in Nashville and across the country. So it can be done. So a Vision Zero plan, starts back to the slide before, starts with naming and being clear about the fact that traffic deaths are preventable and that the number of people being killed in traffic is unacceptable, and there's more that can be done. And this is just a picture of a memorial program where we've been placing memorials for people that have been killed while walking, and also the logo for a group that I lead with Bike Nashville that supports people who have lost a loved one in a traffic crash and provides opportunities for advocacy for people that want to get involved, who've lost a loved one and want to be involved to prevent another family from suffering the way that they have suffered. So recognizing the human toll that traffic deaths take, but also really looking at the data. So I provided some overview of based on Bike Nashville's analysis, where we know that people are being killed year after year after year. A Vision Zero approach is really the city and the city government and the state government and the police department and all of the different agencies responsible for road safety, owning that data and understanding it in the same way. So understanding that these 7 roads are where most people are being killed, what can be done to prevent it? And then just lastly, these slides are from a great organization called Smart Road America. That's and they do this annual report called Dangerous by Design, where they look at the most dangerous roads across America, and they have all the same patterns of the roads that I mentioned that are the most dangerous for Nashville. So there's arterials where people are accessing transit stores, and where speed is really the biggest part of the equation in causing and contributing to traffic deaths. So just to give a couple pictures of the things that I'm talking about in terms of traffic calming and what can be done in addition to lighting and crosswalks and sidewalks, are adding speed humps, so those aren't always appropriate on arterial streets. You can do raised crosswalks. You can do what's known as a pedestrian hybrid beacon, which is a hybrid pedestrian signal that allows there to be additional crosswalks where drivers also stop. So there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox that are supported by all the federal highway safety groups and have been studied and proven to reduce traffic deaths. They just take some investment in public dollars in putting these kind of solutions in, and also take political will, because obviously there's trade-offs when you put these things in. So I think with that, I want to leave a lot of time for questions and discussion, but this is an event we had at the beginning of 2020 to remember and honor the people that were killed in traffic in 2019, which was another record-setting year. And we put out a pair of shoes for each person killed, and the mayor came and announced the Vision Zero effort for Nashville. And we were very encouraged also, like all the people in the background are, we had about half of the Metro Council there too for this event. So in all rooms and forums, the mayor and all of the Metro Council will say that this is important and that they believe in a Vision Zero effort. But since then, traffic deaths have continued to go up, and we've seen very little infrastructure put in along the dangerous corridors. So I believe that there is a lot of good intentions and a lot of awareness about the issue among our city's leadership, but there's not necessarily that accountability to actually, what are we doing in the next year, in the next 2 years? Like, let's not wait for the East Bank to develop and change to then improve pedestrian conditions on Main Street and Dickerson. So right now there's a lot of waiting, and we need to do less waiting and need to start building if we're really serious about moving towards Vision Zero. So I think with that, I will, this is our website. We're on all the social media channels. We share a lot of content about this kind of advocacy and research and reports, and the Vision Zero study I mentioned that's underway right now. We share updates about that all the time on social media. And then we also share like fun bike stuff too. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lindsey. I really appreciate all of that information. I know sometimes it can be a little heavy to hear some of those facts, but it's also nice to hear about the work that's being done and the work that still needs to be done. So we really do appreciate you being here. So I just wanted to remind everyone that we are going to have some questions for Lindsey right now that we've prepared in advance, some questions that we thought maybe y'all would want to hear. And then around 1 p.m., we're going to start asking questions from the chat. So we've already had a couple of questions in there. Keep them coming. Any question about Walk Bike, anything about Lindsey's journey to Walk Bike, anything about Vision Zero that you want to maybe hear more about. We can also send different resources if there's any questions that we might want to send you some resources about. So again, thank you so much, Lindsey. Now that we've heard a little bit about your organization and the work that you're doing, if you don't mind, I want to back up just a little bit and hear a little bit more about you. So I mentioned your previous jobs when I was kind of introducing you, but do you mind just kind of letting the folks know on the call, especially if we have maybe some younger students or young professionals, how you found yourself doing multimodal infrastructure and advocacy work at Walk Bike? What does your journey look like?
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's a heavy story too. I wish it were different, but it's my story. So I love cities. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I love how cities work. I kind of loved urban planning before I knew there was a field of urban planning, but I love thinking about the systems that make cities work. And I've loved that since I was a kid. So I had a couple jobs in city government right out of college, working for the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And then I was working for the City Department of Environmental Protection in New York City, which is actually the water and sewer department. If anybody's into water and sewer, it's a super fascinating surface water system that like comes down from upstate New York to New York City. Anyway, I love that kind of stuff. And I really was thinking I was in my dream job. I was working on implementing then Mayor Bloomberg's sustainability plan, Plan YC, which was one of like the first big sustainability plans for a city. It was really transformative and innovative and exciting. Yeah, so I was living the dream. And I got a call one morning from a social worker at a hospital that I had never heard of, sort of far from my parents' house and where I grew up in Brooklyn, saying, you need to come to the hospital right now. Your father's here and he's being rushed into surgery. Longer story short, my father had been hit while walking with my sister, who was in high school at the time, walking in the morning to the subway, the commute they did every day together. They on a local street by a driver going 45, so speeding, but what we consider kind of like innocent speeding, you might call it. And the driver didn't see him at all, so didn't stop. And he was very, very, very severely injured. But he survived. So that's the good story. And he has made a amazing recovery. But he has a traumatic brain injury, and all of the effects of a traumatic brain injury, has not ever been able to return to work. And it really changed the course of his life, changed the course of my whole family's life, and then eventually led me to transportation advocacy. So I just, when it happens to you and someone in your family, and, having grown up in New York, and I had no idea the number of people that were killed and injured every year while walking, no idea of the scale of the issue. And I wanted to be a part of making a change. So I started volunteering with a group called Transportation Alternatives, which is the Walk Bike Nashville of New York, and eventually got a job there too. And then I worked there for 4 years before moving to Nashville. So it's kind of, I can't not do this work. So I'm lucky enough that I've been able to get a job doing it. But if I weren't doing it for a job, and I did take some time off, I spent 4 years in Nashville working for MPNF Strategic Communications for a variety of clients. So I took a break, but I came back because I'm going to do the work regardless. And I'm passionate about doing it here in Nashville full time, because I see so much opportunity to make a difference, because we have a lot of the tools and the solutions right in front of us. We need the investment and the political will.
Yeah. And people like you, Lindsey, who have gone through, a traumatic experience. And thankfully, I'm so happy to hear that your father, although on a journey to recovery, still is alive and here with you and able to see you kind of doing this work. So it's a beautiful, beautiful part of the story. But
yeah. And when I was in New York, we were able to do a lot of the advocacy together. So we were part of the group I mentioned that I lead here in Nashville, Families for Safe Streets Nashville, is part of a national organization that was founded in New York. So we were part of that group, Families for Safe Streets in New York, and worked on advocacy together. And then it's been really wonderful to be able to start the group here in Nashville too, with the support of the national group, who I know from being part of the group in New York.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, to give you maybe a little bit of a break, I'm sure that's a heavy thing for you to talk about, something a little bit lighter. You mentioned your love of e-bikes, and I just wanted to give you, we don't have that question in our list, but I wanted to give you a second to maybe tell us why someone should have an e-bike. Do you need a license for an e-bike? What's an e-bike?
No, an e-bike is a bike. And so that's the coolest thing about e-bikes is if folks don't know or haven't noticed, B-Cycle is back, the bike share system. So if you're curious about trying an e-bike, go try B-Cycle. It's so fun. So if you ever did B-Cycle before, you probably know that they were pretty heavy, clunky bikes. They're still heavy, clunky bikes, but they have a pedal assist on them now. So they're much, much more fun to ride. Yeah, I mean, and when you ride the bike share version of it, it's even better because you don't have to worry about the battery dying on you, which would be the only, but the technology is just, has changed and gotten so much better in the past few years. And then also the popularity of e-bikes is just exploding in the US and across the world. So the technology is getting better even faster and faster and faster. And also the prices of e-bikes are coming down a lot too. So there's still like, for a good e-bike, you're looking at like $800, $1,000. So they're still pretty pricey, but it's gonna continue to come down as the demand continues to increase and the technology continues to advance. So the kind of e-bike that I'm talking about, which is the most common that you don't need any kind of a license for, it's called a class 1 or a class 2 e-bike, and it can go anywhere a bicycle can go by law. So you can ride it on the greenways too. And it just gives you, it maxes out at 20 miles an hour, which folks that don't ride that often might be like, whoa, 20 miles an hour. But like 20 miles an hour is the speed that you can probably get on a regular bike going down one of our bigger hills in Nashville. You'll get to that speed. So really why I think e-bikes are transformative for Nashville and for people that maybe don't ride as often right now is, 1, for your hills, and 2, you'll feel a lot safer riding on the street because of on those hills. You know, when you're stuck going uphill and the cars are kind of whizzing by you, you start to get kind of stressed out and you're going slow and you're going up a big hill. Like the e-bike will just kick in and give you that little boost that kind of just helps you keep up. Or if you're also, maybe you ride a little less frequently and you have some friends or a partner that rides more frequently, it just gives you that like little boost to help you keep up and kind of sweat a little less. And if you're trying to do a commute too, you know, you'll arrive a little more put together, especially in the summer months here. A little boost makes you feel a little safer and just kind of helps you maybe go a little bit farther and be a little bit less stressed out and sweaty. So I definitely recommend checking out B-Cycle if you want to try it out. There's also a couple of shops around town that rent e-bikes too. So if you want to like not deal with the docking station and kind of have a whole day, that's a good option too.
Awesome. And showing up to your work sweaty from a bike ride is a badge of honor. But yeah, sometimes you might not want that. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Lindsey. So you spoke about Kenny and his disability and the fact that you know, he had to walk. I can imagine that, you know, biking is out of reach for some folks, and your work is, you know, walking and biking. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how your work really helps folks with disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, it's so increasing or improving pedestrian conditions is also going to improve the conditions for people with disabilities or wheelchair users. But I'm working on a project right now. I think this is just like to give a real life example, where we're looking at pedestrian safety along a 2-mile stretch of Dickerson Road. And part of the project is doing some walks along the pike and bringing people out, both you know, people that live in in the area around this stretch of Dickerson Road, but also some of the agency people, folks from NDOT, TDOT, WeGo, public transit, and kind of get everybody together and walk the stretch together and talk about what we're seeing, what the conditions are like. You know, we bring the data to say what the data is showing in terms of the number of crashes, and have a discussion while we walk and look at the conditions together. And recently we were doing one of those walks, and somebody from one of the agencies said, I just, you know, it was along a stretch where there was no sidewalk at all. And we were, you know, kind of up on the side of a ditch in the grass by the side of the road, trying to navigate it. And it was getting dark and cars were speeding by. And so someone from one of the agencies said, I just can't imagine you being a wheelchair user and having to navigate this this stretch, this area. I just can't imagine it. And a resident who was there said, well, we see it every day. There's people, you know, with mobility devices, with you know, using a wheelchair, trying to navigate the stretch every day. We see it every day. And so that really like hit home for me, that there's like this building an aspirational city, a future city, you know, maybe that picture of Stockholm, right? Like that will be more livable, more sustainable, more comfortable, you know, trees, all of it. It'd be beautiful. And I love to see Nashville's pikes go that direction and look like that. But our first priority has to be improving the conditions for people that are using the streets right now today, and making it safer for everyone. I mean, and I just told a really long story, but I have another also recent example of doing a similar kind of walk audit on Gallatin and Due West in Madison. I was there with a group of people as part of the Tennessee Department of Transportation road safety audit. And we stood there on Gallatin and Due West, and that's actually where we started the walk audit, and we walked a mile kind of north and south of there and all talked about all the conditions. But everyone at that intersection that was there that day just said, oh, this is so dangerous. This is oof, you know, and kind of pointed out all the reasons that this really needed to get improved quickly. And then literally a month and a half later, a person who uses a wheelchair was killed on the sidewalk at the bus stop there by, you know, a speeding driver who was also intoxicated, I think, that, you know, blew in there and killed this person. And so that to me is another example of like, you could read that story of and be like, wow, that's terrible that person was, you know, intoxicated and drove that fast. But no, that's not the reason that happened. Like people are going to make bad choices all the time, but the city's experts were there just a month earlier looking at it, naming all the reasons why it was dangerous. And then anyway, so things like that really weigh heavy on my heart. And again, it's not, there's an immediate need right now that is bigger than individuals and individual decisions that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, definitely. It's a system-wide kind of change that we need, and individuals can voice their support for that and make their own choices, of course. But I really enjoy how much you tie it to that we need to change larger scale things as well, which is kind of what we talk about here often with sustainability, of course. So I want to talk about, like, I remember when I was younger, you know, walking to school. I know a lot of folks, you know, used to bike to school. That wasn't really my jam. But, you know, I see some folks that are walking to school, some families that walk to schools. But I also see, you know, the drivers that you're talking about that are racing through school zones on their morning commute. And you mentioned that you worked with Metro Nashville Public Schools and NPS. But can you talk about your Walk Bikes Safe Routes to Schools program and kind of what's involved with ensuring young people are both encouraged to walk and bike, but also are safe while they're doing it? So kind of two questions.
Yeah. So that's a program we've run for a number of years. And it is really about meeting the needs of individual schools. So getting to know the school the teachers, the administrators at schools. So we have a number of focus schools. We'd love to be able to work in more, but we do an approach where we try to fully support a school with all of the various walking and biking needs, and really try to tailor a program to fit the needs of the school versus trying to serve a lot of different schools throughout the city. So we focus on a smaller number of schools, and we start by trying to understand the needs of the school and the needs of the students and the families, and then try to meet those needs to encourage more walking and biking to school. So an example of something we're about to get going at J.E. Moss Elementary in Antioch is what we call a walking school bus. So have a lot of kids right now that are walking to school alone, or need to be dropped off because they couldn't be supervised to take the time to walk to school. So a walking school bus works just what it sounds like, but you have an adult, a trained adult, to walk a group of kids to school in a group together. So kind of pick up students along the way, just like you would on a school bus, but walk. So I think that's something we're really excited about piloting there, and hopefully do more across the city. I mean, there's a school bus driver shortage right now in a lot of cities, but also in Nashville. So having a really hard time hiring bus drivers, and a walking school bus is good for your health, good for the safety of the kids that are walking to school alone now, good for opening up different ways to transport kids to school that doesn't need the high, a bus driver, which is a really specialized skill. It opens up that position to more people that might not be able to drive a bus, but could walk a group to school. So there's a lot of opportunity for that kind of program. So we do, education where we teach kids how to ride bikes and how to do so safely, like give a lot of different information about the rules of the road and how to walk safely, and then also try to provide things that schools need, like the walking school bus. And then lastly, we also work with the parents and the teachers and the administrators to advocate for the infrastructure change that's needed too, because you can have everyone would want more crossing guards and for more hours, but right now we have very limited hours and numbers of crossing guards. So infrastructure is your 24/7 crossing guard, right? So getting more crosswalks, more sidewalks, even if it's some temporary infrastructure sometimes, we can work with students to paint a mural in the street temporarily, and that can have some traffic calming effect, or plant more trees. So really based on the needs of the school, we can advocate for all kinds of different infrastructure, some of it long-term, some of it, temporary, or, pilot phase of something. So
I'm obsessed with the idea of this walking school bus.
yeah.
I would have loved that as a kid. I feel like there are so many. I love the part that you talked about how it could also be a job for folks that maybe aren't, going through the training to be a school bus driver, and kind of doing with all that certification, which of course you want those folks properly certified. But I just love the idea of kind of building that community and folks just seeing their neighborhoods. That's really exciting. If there's anybody on this webinar right now who is interested in that, I know you said it's a pilot. Is that something that you could do with other schools right now, or are you just kind of waiting to see how that works?
Yeah,
Great.
I mean, it's something that's done in other cities. So it's something that we're supporting at J.E. Moss Elementary School. But if people are interested in starting one at their own school, it's all it takes is a willing parent that's willing to kind of, just like you would organize a carpool, you organize a walking school bus. And yeah, I think I speak from that personally because of the work I do, and because of what happened to my family. I could never drive a school bus. I couldn't take on that personal responsibility. I would just be way too nervous, but I would love to walk a whole group of kids to school. So yeah, that's really coming from my own perspective too. I'm like, sign me up for that job. I'd love it.
Definitely. I think most people on this call would probably be at least somewhat interested in that. It sounds really lovely. And then, we're talking about taking potentially buses off the road, like if that was kind of the ultimate goal, or, obviously electrifying them, if that's a possibility. But can you talk about just kind of generally how your work at Walk Bike Nashville, whether it's with the schools program or your larger work that you're doing, intersects with sustainability and the long-term sustainability of the city?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I don't have the stat in front of me in terms of the number of car trips that are under 2 miles, right? But that's something that I know we looked at in New York City quite often. And it's usually a shocking percentage. So, commutes are one thing, but when you look at all of the car trips, in most cities, it's like more than half, or a bikeable or walkable distance, like of 1 to 2 miles. So if we can reduce the number of those short trips by making it more pleasant, safer to walk and bike, we can have a huge impact in the number of cars on the road. And not to mention, like, just also increase people's health too. So it's interesting. The thing about working in transportation advocacy is you find yourself tripping over all of the reasons why it's good. So like, it's more about when I have to talk to a group about, the importance of building a more walkable and bikeable and livable Nashville, I have to struggle to say, okay, am I going to talk about the environmental benefits? Am I going to talk about the safety benefits? Am I going to talk about the health benefits? Like, there are just so many benefits to investing in making it more walkable and bikeable. It's like you have to choose which one to talk about on which day, because you'll just overwhelm people with information and data. So yeah, I mean, I think the long term for Nashville, I also think you hear a lot like, oh, well, Nashville's such a car culture and like people don't want to give up their cars. Well, that's true in every city. I mean, every city is New York City has like some of the highest, public transit riding rates in the country. But it's still a car culture. I mean, if you have a car, you want a car. Who doesn't want a car? Like, of course. Yeah. It's the easiest. You get your radio, your seat, like everybody, and so it's not about, some trips are always going to have to be in a car. You got to go to the doctor, you have your kids, you have to make 5 stops. Like, if you can have your car and you can afford your car, those trips are going to be in a car. It's about making the trips that could be done in walking and biking, making those easy choices for people to make, so that they might leave the car at home.
So small changes. So we're coming up on 1 p.m. So I want to make sure that I ask this one last question before we kind of say goodbye to the folks that need to hop off at the hour. But how can we support your organization's work or get involved? And you have an exciting event coming up on October 17th that maybe you can tell us about.
Yes, thank you for asking. So yeah, October 17th, this Sunday, 12 to 5, we are closing down Buchanan Street between D.B. Todd Boulevard and Rosa Parks, 2 cars, and opening it up to people. So we have like 30 community organizations coming out. Like, the public library is going to do a puppet show. There's going to be dance classes, DJ, music, just tons of fun stuff to get out and walk and bike in the street. And Open Streets is a concept that done all over the country and all over the world, where you close down streets to cars, open it up to people. And it's not really like a street fair or a festival. It's more about just experiencing the street and imagining how the street could feel, the different uses you could do in a street, the way that you could use the public space differently if we didn't just give over all that space all the time to cars. So it's about just having a lot of different fun, family-friendly activities to reimagine a street for a day and think about, what it could be if we weren't always giving it all that space over to cars, but maybe some days, some other times had other uses for it.
Love it.
So yeah,
That's
it's
very,
gonna
very
be really
exciting.
fun.
Mhm.
And other ways to get involved, definitely follow us on social media. You can sign up for our email. We do a monthly newsletter that's kind of a roundup of everything that's happening. You can sign up for our email on our website. And then coming up on Wednesday, October 20th, 6 to 7, we have our monthly advocacy meeting. We call it the Advocacy Corner. And that's where we'll give like a quick update on kind of everything that's happening in walking and biking and transportation policy in the city, and then have a discussion based on a hot topic. So actually the one coming up next week, we're going to be talking about the East Bank study that the Metro Planning Department is doing, if folks are interested in that. So we usually have some kind of a special topic for discussion. So I always encourage people that are interested in getting more involved to try to zoom into that meeting, and you can hear like quick overview of everything in 10 minutes, and then also dig into a specific topic and figure out where you might want to plug in more.
Awesome. Wonderful. So those are all wonderful ways. And we will be sure to share that with everyone on this call afterwards. So don't worry if you didn't catch some of that. And Jen, do you want to kind of wrap us up for the hour and then get us into some chat questions?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to share my screen really quickly just to let everybody know what's coming up next for Sustainable in the City. As always, we know some of you only have the hour with us. So if you have to go, we thank you for being here. And if you haven't put your questions in the chat yet, please do, because we do have plenty of time for questions after this. But for our very next Sustainable in the City, of course, I am the Zero Waste Program Manager for Metro Nashville, so I'm super duper excited about Tennessee Zero Waste Day coming up. It is the second annual Zero Waste Day that TDEC has hosted, and we are going to have TDEC with us to talk about Zero Waste Day and what that means, how you can get involved, and talk all things waste. It's going to be super fun, so don't forget to sign up for that. We'll get you the registration link as always in the follow-up email, as well as there'll be a recording of this, and you can share the recording with your friends, your family, your enemies. Everybody, please share this across, because this has been an incredible presentation today. I've learned so much, as well as had memories of horror stories that have popped up into my brain that I haven't thought about in many years. So really good information. Hope you'll join us next time as well. But I will stop sharing that. And I will go ahead and pull up the questions that we do currently have. So we haven't had too many yet, but I've got too many windows open. So far, we have, first, I know John had asked a question early on. So John had asked in terms of some of these larger thoroughfares that have these higher speed limits. Of course, it's appropriate to reduce some of those speed limits, but you're always dealing with that human failure of people that are not going to slow down. They're not going to pay attention to those speed limits. And then, of course, there's the lack of potential enforcement of those speed limits on those areas. So has there been any consideration about putting more infrastructure such as pedestrian bridges over those major thoroughfares that were originally designed with cars in mind and not people in mind?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because it feels like why not build over it, right? Like just create that separated space and just build over it. My general understanding is that cities have really moved away from that kind of infrastructure. I mean, like I think a good example on like we have here on like 21st Avenue, like Vanderbilt has a bridge that goes over. So I think in certain cases for private development, it might make sense, but in terms of like large scale public infrastructure, it's a lot. It doesn't necessarily feel like it, but it is a lot more economical to like retrofit the streets and create those safe spaces in the street versus creating a whole nother piece of infrastructure that we'd have to maintain and keep safe. So I think in very specific tricky, difficult situations where maybe also there's a private partner for the maintenance of it, it might make sense. But like where we're talking about the change that needs to happen on Murfreesboro Pike, Dickerson Pike, Nolensville Road, like we couldn't possibly build bridges at, you know, every transit stop that we would need to really keep it safe.
Absolutely. I'm just envisioning like what a road would look like if at every stoplight there was a big giant bridge that was going across that street to really make it reasonable for people to cross that street. And that seems incredibly excessive. But an interesting question. So that was the only question in our chat so far, but I have a question, maybe two personally, while the other folks have some other thoughts. We did just get another question. Julia, I'm going to get to you, but I'm going to pop this one in first. You know, one of the things that you talked about, and I know with any of these kind of, I mean, we have our zero waste master plan that involves changing a whole philosophy. Anything involved with sustainability is so heavy on really changing the way people think and what priorities they put first. And so I'm just curious if, you know, how do you go about that? I keep thinking about the defensive driver training that I had. And there were people that were like, well, my car's bigger than your bike, so you better get out of my way. And those are words that came out of people's mouths that, you know, I used to live in Chicago and I walked, I biked, I took public transportation, and there was at least felt like there was more respect of those different modes of transportation. So I'm just curious, how do you go about working towards changing that philosophy? And if you've seen any kind of successes in, you know, people starting to get it and understanding that maybe we need to think when we're sitting at a stoplight and that stoplight is only 6 seconds, but it feels like an eternity to you. There's a reason why those stoplights are long and you're having to sit there. Even if the pedestrian isn't there, the pedestrian could have been there. So I'm just curious in terms of that philosophy piece, where are we at? And how can we, you know, it's a big question.
And I think I tend to, I mean, especially having a communications background, having spent some time like working on communications campaigns, I want to come up with the, you know, educational campaign that's going to change minds, win hearts and minds, and change the culture. And I think that that's certainly part of it. Like we need more education. Like some of the stats I was talking about, like why the speed limit is a speed limit, like why is it 40, why is it 30, why is it 20? And that's because of the difference of life and death. And in the case of pedestrian, like I think there's more education that can happen about, you know, it's basic physics, but most, you know, we don't think about it that way because we're so used to being in our cars and driving. So I think there is some education that could be done there. That said, it's, to me, we're wasting time and money and making little change at the margins by focusing on education and trying to win hearts and minds and change people's point of view. Like if we build the roads differently and we build the infrastructure that signals to people, this is where you need to be looking for a pedestrian here, not because we put a sign saying watch for a pedestrian, but because we built the road in a way where the lane is narrower, where there are street trees, where there are sidewalks, where there's a median in the middle of the road, like where that infrastructure is signaling to your brain that there's going to be people here. That's how we're going to change behavior and change culture. So to me, like once we've totally retrofitted all of those major pikes for pedestrian infrastructure and added like sidewalks, like very basic pedestrian infrastructure, like we need more crosswalks, surely. Like we cannot have a mile on a major transit route without a crosswalk, which you see everywhere all the time in Nashville, and it's like absolutely unacceptable. Like we need more signalized crossings, we need more crosswalks, but we also need more sidewalks. Like once we have those 7 deadly roads built out with all of that infrastructure, then let's talk about an education campaign. Like, let's see what the numbers look like then, in terms of who's biking and who's walking and how many people are being killed and injured, and then see what amount of money we need to invest in an education campaign. So for now, I would put all the money into infrastructure and let the
Makes
infrastructure
sense.
change the culture. And then, once we have the infrastructure built, then we can continue to work on changing the culture.
Absolutely. We did get a few more questions that have come in. So this person asked, they joined late, but heard a lot about the pedestrian safety and issues and a bit about the e-bikes, but did not hear about use of roads by pedal cyclists. Are there some things that you can say about pedal cyclists, their habits and dangers, what we or they can do to improve cycling safety?
Yeah. This to me comes down to infrastructure too. There is a plan. It's in the 2017 Walk and Bike Strategic Plan for Nashville for a network of protected, separated bike lanes. So if folks are familiar, like with Davidson Street, when you're coming out of Shelby Bottoms Park, the bike lane there that has the bollards and sort of barricades all the way down. And it's really separated from traffic and protected with that some measure of protection. That's the kind of bike lane that we need to increase the number of people biking. And that's what's really going to get more people biking, is when we have that kind of infrastructure that's separated and protected and feels completely different than any of the other kind of on-road bike facilities. And one thing, so there is a plan for a network to get in, through, and around downtown, north, south, east, west, on protected bike lanes. And so there's a plan. We need to build that out. So that to me is the number one thing. And then also, just to clarify on like the pedal cyclists versus e-bikes, the kind of e-bike I was talking about, you would not know the difference between that kind of bike and a pedal bike. It's called a pedal assist bike. And so it really just looks exactly the same. In some cases, you'll see a battery, like where, a bike that's not an e-bike would have like a water bottle holder. Like you'll see a battery there, but they're even making e-bikes now where the battery is completely internal and you can't even see the battery, and you might not even spot that. So all the things I was saying about e-bike and e-bike behavior is true for pedal bikes too, the same category.
That's great. And I'm going to add a follow-up question. Is there, and I should probably know the answer to this, but is there a resource for if somebody's interested in getting out there and biking on Nashville streets? Is there a good resource for people to go to for those safe bikeways and where they're located?
Yeah, well, Google Maps is a great resource.
That's
not
what
always perfect, right? But they do have the bike lanes within Google Maps, so you can always use that. There's a Greenways map that's great, like a printed version and online version. So definitely check out that. There's also this map called the Groove Map, and we have all these maps on our websites too. And the Groove Map, looking mostly at like the area in and around downtown, tries to map out like the safest and sort of like calmest, they call it low stress bike network too. That are going to put you on more of those protected routes too. So yeah, and we also do, we don't have one coming up right now, but at regular intervals, we do classes for adults that both like teach people who don't know how to ride right now how to ride, and also like a city cycling 101 to help people beef up their skills if they're not quite comfortable riding on the road. And I also encourage everyone to, if you're a little unsure of your biking skills and maybe haven't done it in a while, to use a greenway system, because those are they're beautiful, and completely separated from traffic, and a great way to explore a different part of the city. And so I definitely recommend getting your skills up on the greenways first, getting a little confidence before hitting the road.
Awesome. And we have another question So this comes from Rachel. She says, in the beginning, you were talking about accountability for crashes. When you are advocating for safer streets for pedestrians, are you also including accountability cameras for drivers?
Yeah, I think speed cameras are an important tool that are used all over the country and all over the world, and used really effectively in New York City, where I'm from, especially in school zones to keep drivers driving the speed limit. I'm always going to advocate for infrastructure first as the first way, but I think a camera program, there certainly are concerns and concerns that have been studied by the ACLU and others about like private vendors and companies. I mean, you could have a whole session about traffic cameras and kind of dig into all the pros and cons and the missteps. But if a program is done correctly, where it's really managed by the city and by a city Department of Transportation, you can minimize a lot of those concerns about private companies and data sharing, and be able to maintain the integrity of the program as an educational tool for drivers. So what was done in New York City with the speed camera program was the fines were lowered to be, it's no points on the license, not a moving violation, and more of like the equivalent of a parking ticket. So you kind of lower the intensity and the repercussions of the violation, but treat it more like an educational tool to make people aware of the speed that they're driving along some of these streets. So I think it could be a good tool if implemented correctly for traffic safety in Nashville. But there's a couple hurdles to legal hurdles, and I think like programmatic hurdles and agency hurdles to get through to stand up a program. So in the meantime, we're definitely more focused at Walk Bike Nashville on the infrastructure side of things.
Absolutely. Well, that was the end of our questions that we have in the chat. Christina, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask at this point? This has been so informative, just really, really good information. I really appreciate you being here to talk to us about these issues. They're important for drivers as well. I think we kind of forget often that just because you're not a pedestrian doesn't mean you don't need to be thinking about a lot of these issues. It's, thinking about our neighbors and our friends and our family and everybody here in Nashville. So this has just been really, really wonderful. But Christina, do you have anything else? I don't want to cut you off. If you've got any other questions, burning questions that you want to ask.
No, the only question I really wanted to ask is just for all the other kind of infrastructure lovers out there, myself being one of them. Are there any podcasts or like websites or books that you've read that you really think kind of dives into the nitty gritty of why infrastructure is so important, why it is a community commodity, like Jenn was talking about? Like, these are things that we actually want to see, regardless of if you're a pedestrian or a cyclist or someone driving, like these infrastructure kind of issues. So any recommendations that you have?
Yeah, so that group I mentioned, Smart Growth America, is a great group, and they have a really good email and social media. Another group is called NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Organizations or Officials, NACTO, NACTO. They're on social media. They created some of those graphics around speeding that I shared too. And yeah, that's a really great group because they are the transportation officials in cities. It's an association of transportation officials in cities. So really have the expertise in what's happening in other cities. And then I'll give a plug to where I used to work at Transportation Alternatives. Like, I think it's always good when talking about making improvements in Nashville, you don't want to bring up New York, San Francisco, Paris too much, because we know New York and San Francisco are different than Nashville. But I do think it's really fun, interesting, inspiring to follow what's happening in some of the bigger cities, and also give you perspective on where there's opportunities for Nashville. I'll just say that, like, where cities have more established programs for various things that we could be doing here in Nashville. So I definitely like give transportation alternatives a follow too. All their social content is really engaging and get a sense of what's happening in bigger cities.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I appreciate that. Also, there is a book, I believe it also is New York specific, so forgive us, but it's by Kate Asher and it's called The Works. And that is one of my favorite infrastructure books because it
Oh
has
my
lots
gosh,
of.
I love that book.
It's so good.
Yeah, so it's all graphics.
Yep.
So like into infographics and visuals, and you're a visual learner. It just, yes, it explains how. That's a book I actually got before I started working at the water and sewer department. That was part of what like got me really excited about working there. So yeah, I love that book. Also a great book for like, any middle or high school or in your life too. That spark an interest in the next generation and this stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Because what you keep talking about is we need to make system change, and we need to have those folks who are, whether it's a sad story or an exciting story that they, learned from a book, that they get into this work. And there are people like you, Lindsey, who are making our streets safer. So that was all I had for my questions.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to say I didn't see anything else come in. So thanks to everyone that stuck around for these additional questions. As always, we'll send you up that follow-up email with all of the links, all the different resources we talked about today. And don't forget to register. We'll send our link to register for our next episode of Sustainable in the City for October 27th with TDEC and Tennessee Zero Waste Day. So we'll see you all on the 27th. And Lindsey, thanks again.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.